For more than a century, people believed we already knew everything about the Titanic. Countless books, films, and investigations tried to capture the truth behind the disaster. Yet, in the depths of the North Atlantic, something unexpected has surfaced, an object tied directly to the ship's final hours. Daniel Whitaker, a name forgotten in passenger lists, has suddenly returned to history through a relic no one ever imagined could survive. What his camera revealed is not just evidence of a tragedy, it is a reminder that some voices of the past refuse to stay silent. The forgotten passenger. When the Titanic sailed from Southampton on April 10, 1912, it carried a world within its steel walls. There were the wealthy industrialists and socialites who occupied the luxurious first-class suites, immigrants packed tightly into steerage, and hundreds of crew members whose labor kept the ship moving day and night. The passenger list was exhaustive, documenting everyone from the richest American tycoons to the humblest third-class families searching for a better life. Among the second-class names, one stood out only in hindsight: Daniel Whitaker, a 28-year-old journalist from London. His name was entered neatly on the manifest. But after April 15th, when the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, Whitaker seemed to vanish from history altogether. No lifeboat carried him to safety. No survivor's testimony ever mentioned him. No body matching his description was recovered from the sea. For decades, his name remained nothing more than a quiet entry in the archives, a life erased by tragedy without even a fragment of evidence to connect him to the story of that night. He was, quite literally, the forgotten passenger. That began to change in 1987, during one of the earliest salvage expeditions to the Titanic's resting place. Divers retrieved a badly degraded leather bag, its seams breaking apart after 75 years underwater. Inside, they found Whitaker's notebook. At first, it seemed unremarkable: notes about the quality of the food, comments on the weather, observations about fellow passengers. But the tone shifted drastically near the end. The handwriting grew jagged, hurried, as if written under unbearable pressure. The final line was chilling in its simplicity. "The ship has hit an iceberg. I must chronicle it. I am taking photos. God protect me." Then abruptly, the entries stopped. For years, historians dismissed the possibility that Whitaker had been carrying a camera. While Kodak brownie box cameras had been introduced in 1900 and were popular with middle-class travelers, experts argued that no such device could possibly survive the crushing pressure and corrosive salt water of the North Atlantic for decades. The claim was chalked up to speculation, the desperate imagination of a man recording his last moments. But that assumption collapsed when, more than a century after the disaster, a deep-sea expedition uncovered something remarkable. Half a mile away from the main wreckage, buried under layers of sediment, lay a camera in far better condition than anyone believed possible. Its leather casing remained supple, its metal fittings intact, and inside, a fragile coil of film still clung to the spool. Against all logic, the forgotten passenger's story was about to be retold. The impossible discovery. In recent years, deep-sea missions have returned again and again to the Titanic's wreck site. The ship lies nearly 12,600 feet below the surface, a place where pressure crushes steel and salt water devours everything organic. That's why no one expected the robotic arm of a submersible to uncover a camera resting in the silt, astonishingly well preserved. The discovery shocked even veteran diver Mark Harris, who immediately realized that something about this object was wrong. It wasn't where it should have been. The camera lay nearly half a mile away from the Titanic's debris field, positioned as if deliberately placed there. The leather casing remained intact, flexible in a way that should have been impossible after more than a century underwater. Metal fittings were tarnished, but not destroyed. When the crew secured the relic inside the sub's chamber, their silence was telling. This was not just another artifact. It felt out of place. like a message that had been waiting for them to find. Scientists treated it with the same caution as an unexploded device. Once back on the research vessel, the debate began. Could this camera really have come from the Titanic? Some suggested it was lost by a modern traveler, maybe a collector of vintage equipment. But that explanation made little sense. The Kodak Brownie was an early model introduced in 1900, and by 1912 it was still considered expensive and rare. Finding one in such a state of preservation at the bottom of the Atlantic was beyond unlikely. When they carefully examined the reel of film still inside, disbelief turned to dread. The film coils, fragile but intact, should have dissolved decades earlier. Yet they were there, carrying potential images from a night frozen in tragedy. For the crew, one decision loomed. Should they risk developing the film, knowing it might reveal not just history, but the final moments of those who never survived? The cursed film. The decision to develop the film was not taken lightly. On board the research vessel, the captain called for a vote. 6 members of the crew argued in favor, 6 warned against it. The tiebreaker came from the captain himself, who decided to sleep on the matter. The next morning, his verdict was clear. The world needed to know what this camera had seen. The film would be developed. The laboratory was set up with climate control to stabilize humidity and temperature. The archivists treated the object as if it were explosive. At first, the latch resisted every attempt to open it. When it finally gave way with a sharp click, a tightly wound reel of celluloid appeared, shockingly unbroken. The archivist's hands shook as she attempted to unwind it, only to hear a brittle crack as flakes of rust fell onto the table. But the rust wasn't ordinary. Under the lights, the fragments clung together in jagged shapes that looked like letters, as if the film itself carried imprints of words never written. Dr. Eleanor Voss, the chief archivist, recognized that they were dealing with something unprecedented. Attempts to digitize the negatives caused scanners to malfunction. Screens flickered with error codes until distorted previews appeared, shadows and blurred outlines that seemed almost human. When the images were stabilized, strange anomalies emerged. Metadata embedded in the scans showed timestamps far beyond 1912, some even decades into the future. Every file had the same size, 47.47 megabytes, and compressed to exactly 191.22 kilobytes, a coincidence that unsettled the team. But it was the timing that truly silenced the room. The first frame clearly showed the ship's railing. The timestamp read April 15, 1912, at 2:20 a.m. The precise minute the Titanic disappeared beneath the waves. According to every scientific principle, the film should not exist. And yet, it did. Dr. Voss sealed the reel in an archival sleeve and scrawled one word across it in red ink. Cursed. The haunting photographs. When the film was finally stabilized, the first images appeared on screen. At first glance, they seemed almost ordinary, yet each frame carried the weight of a tragedy about to unfold. Children played shuffleboard on the deck, their laughter frozen in time. A young girl's hair flowed sideways, caught by a breeze that no longer existed. A woman adjusted a basket of Irish lace, unaware that the ship beneath her feet was beginning to tilt ever so slightly. These were moments of life that would vanish forever within the hour. Then came the image of the ship's ornate clock. Its hands were locked at 2:17 a.m., 3 minutes before the vessel made its final plunge. The sharpness of the photograph was eerie. Every scratch on the brass face could be seen clearly, as though the camera had cut through chaos to capture time's last breath. The photographs grew darker as the film progressed. One showed the grand staircase, chandeliers swaying at impossible angles, their prisms reflecting light from an unknown source. Another revealed a landing on A deck, water already lapping at the lowest steps. In the polished wood paneling, faint reflections showed passengers clinging desperately to railings, distorted by the rising flood. Lifeboat 14 appeared next, hanging at a crooked angle. The ropes looked partially severed. Faces in the boat stared upward, not in terror, but in the hollow realization of what was coming. A woman's lips formed an O of shock as she pressed gloved fingers to her face. A crewman's arm stretched toward the camera, frozen in a gesture that could have been warning or pleading. Then the film lurched into chaos. The camera must have been clutched tightly as water swept across the deck. A man fought to open a cabinet holding life belts, locked shut in his moment of desperation. Two mothers strained to keep children above the flood. The final clear frames showed a wall of water rushing forward, swallowing everything in its path. And then, against all possibility, one last image appeared. A view from below the surface, staring up at an empty ocean where the Titanic should have been. The missing photographer. Once the photographs were revealed, attention turned to the question of ownership. Who had taken them, and how had the camera ended up so far from the wreck? The serial number etched on its casing provided the first clue. Records from Kodak's 1912 shipments showed that one Brownie camera had been sold on Fleet Street in London to a man named D. Whitaker. The name matched only one Titanic passenger, Daniel Whitaker, the 28-year-old journalist whose notebook had been recovered decades earlier. Whitaker's diary described the ship's food, the weather, and the behavior of fellow passengers. But in the final, frantic entry, he declared that the Titanic had struck an iceberg and that he was determined to chronicle the disaster with photographs. After that, silence. He never appeared in survivor accounts, nor was his body among the hundreds recovered in the days following the sinking. It was as though he vanished at the very moment he pressed the shutter. Forensic experts re-examined his notebook. The last pages had been torn out, but faint indentations remained, words etched into the paper by the pressure of his pen. Specialists using imaging technology revealed jagged impressions, suggesting hurried notes made in near panic. Yet the words could not be reconstructed fully. What remained was enough to imply urgency, fear, and a determination to record what others could not. More troubling was his press pass, found in the same leather bag as the notebook. The photograph of Whitaker had faded to a gray blur, erasing his features entirely. Newspaper archives from 1912 contained no record of a journalist by his name, no bylines, no employment records, nothing beyond that one manifest entry. Historians were left with a haunting possibility. Had Whitaker been a real correspondent, or had his identity been fabricated for reasons lost to time? Either way, the evidence pointed to one fact. Daniel Whitaker had carried that camera on the Titanic. He had tried to capture the ship's last hours, and against all reason, his film had survived to tell a story that he could not. The horrifying truth revealed. By the time restoration teams prepared the film for public release, anticipation had reached a fever pitch. Historians, engineers, and families of victims gathered for a press conference, bracing for whatever might emerge. The first images seemed harmless, almost tender. Passengers enjoying themselves, the Titanic still whole. But as the sequence unfolded, the room fell silent. Each frame contradicted long-held assumptions about the disaster. The photographs showed the flooding advancing faster than official inquiries had ever recorded. The ship's breakage appeared at a sharper angle, confirming suspicions that substandard rivets had given way. The lifeboat sequences revealed ropes frayed or deliberately cut, suggesting panic and disorganization far worse than survivor testimony had admitted. Even the timeline was shaken. The last timestamp marked 2:20 a.m., yet the camera kept recording for 3 minutes after the stern vanished beneath the waves. No one should have survived long enough to take those pictures. And yet, they existed. Marine engineers pored over the details, frame by frame. Their carefully built computer models became useless in the face of this new evidence. Survivors' descendants watched in grief as faces they recognized appeared on screen. children playing, women carrying baskets, men reaching for safety. For the first time, the Titanic was no longer just a shipwreck. It was a series of personal moments captured at the very edge of life. The ethical debate began immediately. Were these photographs a gift from history or an intrusion into the final minutes of people who never had a chance to consent? One journalist wrote, "We aren't studying history anymore. We're invading someone's dying moments." Yet despite the unease, the images could not be unseen. They offered clarity, but also horror. Proof that the Titanic's last breath had been recorded, and that a century later, the world was still not ready to face it. The mystery of Daniel Whitaker's camera may never be fully explained. Against every law of science, it endured more than a century at the bottom of the ocean, delivering a witness account that no one expected. Whether you see it as history preserved or as a curse that should have remained buried, one truth is clear: the Titanic story is still not finished. What do you think? Should these haunting photographs have been shown to the world, or should they have stayed hidden in the deep? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from history's darkest chapters.